Hi, I'm Rachel Little, and today I'm at the West Virginia State Museum in Charleston. I'm going to take you guys with me on a virtual tour. Along the way, we're going to stop and talk about some of the most important people, places, and events in West Virginia's history. Let's go! Our first stop takes us all the way back to 360 million BC, before the world as we know it now was fully formed. West Virginia was making history even way back then. These artifacts I'm going to show you are proof of that. Behind me you'll see the world's oldest seed, the Elkinsia polymorpha. It was found right here in West Virginia near Elkins, and it's over 360 million years old. I also want to show you this mastodon jaw. Mastodons were elephant-like animals that weighed 6,000 to 12,000 pounds. This one was found near St. Albans, West Virginia. It's hard to imagine animals like that roaming around right where we live. Now we're going to take a look at what West Virginia was like in 10,000 BC. This time when the continent of North America was called the Woodland period. And during this period, many different native groups were beginning to settle in West Virginia. One of these groups is called the Adena people. The Adena people had a very interesting practice of building mounds. One of these mounds is the Grave Creek Mound that we can see right here in Moundsville, West Virginia. The Adena people buried people in these mounds as a way to show respect, and they buried them with things that were important to their culture, like jewelry and tools. The next time period we are going to visit is the 1700s. During this time, the country of England owned large pieces of land in North America called colonies. These colonies eventually fought to be free from England in what is called the Revolutionary War. This is how the United States of America was created. One of the most important people during this time was George Washington, our very first president. These are objects that belonged to George Washington when he was working to survey land in West Virginia. It's amazing to know that our state was explored by one of the most important men in history. Now we're going to think about what life is like in West Virginia in the 1800s. Life was much different back then and much harder. People who settled in West Virginia had to build everything themselves. This log cabin is a perfect example. This is actually a real cabin that was built in Logan County by the Vance family in the late 1800s. It was also used as a one-room schoolhouse. Imagine this tiny room being your entire school. In 1861, the Civil War began in the United States. This war was fought for many political, social, and economic reasons, the most important of which was ending slavery. Some states, called Confederate states, left our country because they believed it was wrong for the government to tell them that they could not own slaves. Other states, called Union states, remained a part of our country because they thought slavery was wrong and that it should end. During this time, West Virginia was not its own state. It was actually still a part of Virginia. During the war, West Virginia began the process of becoming a state as a part of the Union. This was due to many reasons, including the fight against slavery, but also because West Virginians were facing unfair social and political treatment by the government of Virginia. On June 20th, 1863, West Virginia joined the Union as the 35th state after the approval of President Abraham Lincoln. The Civil War was still happening at this time, so West Virginia faced the difficult job of forming a state during wartime. There were many leaders during this time, such as John Carlisle, Arthur Borman, Waitman Willie, and Francis Pierpont. In the early 1900s, industries of many kinds were very successful in West Virginia. These include railroad transportation, salt production, glass and pottery, oil and gas, steel and metalworking, river transportation, agriculture, and wood products. Perhaps the most important industry in West Virginia is coal mining. West Virginia has some of the richest coal fields in the entire world. Coal mining is not an easy job. In the beginning, men would load the coal into carts that were pulled by donkeys, and often they would have to use explosives to break up huge pieces of rock. Men weren't the only ones working in mines, however. Boys as young as 7 or 8 would often work in the mines and help do very dangerous jobs as well. Luckily, over time, technology developed and coal mining became much safer. There were also laws passed that made child labor in the mines illegal. Most coal miners working in West Virginia at this time lived in company towns. These were towns that were owned and managed by whoever owned the coal mine. One of the most important places in a company town was the company store. In the store, miners could use the money they were paid by the company, which was called scrip, to buy everything they needed, like food, clothes, tools, and even toys. Here you can see some of the toys that were sold back then. The 1920s were a difficult time in West Virginia's history. On top of the issues the nation was facing, West Virginia had some problems of its own. Coal company owners were beginning to mistreat their workers, and they were forced to endure this mistreatment because those who resisted were faced with eviction from their homes or violence. This began a time in West Virginia's history called the Mine Wars. This involved several battles between miners and those who owned the coal companies. Women were also hard at work during this time. They not only worked jobs, but they also worked very hard to take care of their children. One job that was common for women to have at this time was as a telephone operator. This giant board you see next to me is what telephone operators would use to help callers find who they were looking to get a hold of. Women did not have an easy life in the early 1900s. At this time, they did not even have the right to vote. But women in West Virginia worked very hard to change this in groups such as the Women's Christian Temperance Union. This group worked very hard to earn women the right to vote, and in 1920, they contributed to just that. West Virginians are known for being people who fight for what they believe in. One way that West Virginians do this is by serving in the military. West Virginia has more veterans per capita than any state in the entire country. They've served in every U.S. war and every branch of the military. In the 1960s, West Virginia contributed to world-class athletics. Jerry West is an NBA player who played for the LA Lakers for 14 years, and he's from right here in West Virginia, in Chillian. He's actually the person that the NBA logo is modeled after. In the 1980s, we contributed once again to world-class athletics. Mary Lou Retton from Fairmont, West Virginia, was actually the first woman to ever win an Olympic gold medal in an individual event from the United States. Today, we know that West Virginia has a very rich, important history. We can see the way our state has contributed to our nation and how the people who live here have overcome immense challenges. From the beginnings of time until today, West Virginians are still making history. And I know as time goes on, West Virginians just like you will continue to add to our legacy. Thank you for coming with me on this virtual tour of the West Virginia State Museum. There's so much here to explore that I wasn't able to show you. I encourage you to come yourself and take some time exploring the exhibits. I promise you'll leave with a deeper appreciation for West Virginia's history and its people. The museum is open from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m., Tuesdays through Saturdays. Thank you.